Hey, hey, hey.
Hello, how you doing?
All right. Trying to keep this party going. There we go. Okay. Why's my video not on? I even took a better video. I even got a video.
A video? Oh.
We're add a little bit of life. That or just gonna have a video of somebody just shaking their head. Hey, Brian.
Hey there, how's it going?
Good. Just for inclusiveness, Niaz was pinging me offline, trying to figure out who our signing gurus were. So of course I threw your name there.
All right.
He'll follow up with you. And he had some other Windows verification-y thing, which I'm not sure if it was the Claire thing that they've been working on or what, but he'll follow up with you.
All right, yeah, I can probably redirect as needed.
All right. Actually, I'm not sure who accepted. Let me. This was my calendar invite. Tracking. Justin's the only one that accepted. There we go. All right. So let me bring up our meeting notes here. So Justin, just for your visibility, in the last meeting, Cappos had brought up, the concern around, going forward without design and so forth. And, I tried to balance that, of course, we'd like, and Trishank's here, he was actually bringing it up. I just want to make sure that we're getting the right balance between requirements and scenarios and learning things we don't know. So that's about it. So I did promise that we were going to try to keep a couple of us. I know that Omar has been helping where he can, also just try to make sure we balance out the direct engineering work that we're committing, as well as is this grounded in the scenarios and the requirements that we've been trying to do. So we'll try to keep this full circle kind of complete in all the work we want to do here.
Yeah.
That said, how can we get a next step? Actually, before we just ping to see if Sajay can make it. Where is
I think also, I know I had some conflicts last week, so I'm not sure the state of things. So we could do just a brief catch up of where we're at.
Sure. So do you want to take that, Justin, or you want me to take it?
You can take it.
So basically, we just wanted to get, you and Niaz and some others had brought up some stuff that we hadn't actually even thought of. So it's, we have plenty of things we know. We have plenty of things we know we don't know, and we don't know the things we don't know. So we wanted to it seemed like a good time to kind of get this thing started where we get some prototype in place to flush out, giving like a sketch so the people that keep referring to the subject matter experts to come in with things like, hey, where can you and others plug in the key signing efforts you're working on to this effort? Certainly for an area that we hadn't even thought of on how you do offline key management. Or I hadn't, I won't say everybody. While we still work in like, how does the basic persistence happen in a registry? What would the UX kind of look like? How do we deal with things where Tough brings in a more detailed verification? Is there a line there? Is it part of the core where SBOMs come in and so forth? So by getting something started, we can start iterating and bringing that back to the scenarios and requirements.
So I wrote, based on our discussion about what was the kind of minimal thing that would make sense in OCI that we could actually put in without making a lot of registry changes, which was kind of what I kind of wanted to start prototyping, because basically the question came like, how are we going to store signatures, and what are we going to what's actually going to look like, and how many new APIs are we going to build. So the kind of conversation we had was around what can we do without changing very much at all, so that we have a standard way of having signatures that doesn't make any particular assumptions about what you're going to do with the signatures, that we can then prototype using this as a layer to build up. I mean, my plan is to implement a version of this that's as minimal as possible, and then use that to build, for example, a something which has the same, which basically is tough, but with slightly different documents, because so they fit sanely in a registry, in native registry format, with using this native registry signing proposal. I drafted a doc, which I just finished now, which is basically a minimal, this is what a signing in a registry would look like, assuming that we're not going to make any other changes to the registry. And so, well, the minimal possible changes, so that we can build a prototype on that, just to so basically it just involves using annotations in the short term, but extending the syntax, extending the descriptors later to have actual signature native things, but it's just using annotations in the very short term so that we can actually implement it without any kind of difference to standard. It needs a few more details at the bottom, but that was kind of what I was going to work off to prototype it.
Do we want to do the 3 minutes here to read this? We catch up.
Yeah, it works for me. I'll check it out.
I don't consider myself a speed reader, so I'll just say that I'm done. And
I'm finished reading. Justin, can you correct me if I'm wrong, but this looks like it's a shorter restatement of the design options PR that I sent out a while ago.
It's, yeah, I kind of wrote a longer one and then I shortened it by removing all the ones I thought were not a, well, I wasn't that, we're probably, I mean, this is, as far as I can see, this is more or less the one that makes sense to implement of those options. And it's more or less a version of, yeah, because I wrote a longer version where I went through all the options and I decided that having signatures as separate documents that were pointed at just created indirection for not much reason, given that signatures are relatively small. And that once you decided signing descriptors was the sensible thing to do, because that's the kind of unit that OCI talks about, then that answers all the questions about, can you sign additional data? The answer is yes. So then you should be able to, then basically that was then I decided as I was writing my document, those were the two important questions. And therefore I'd write this version of the document that just stated what I thought the most sane thing to prototype was, and see if we think there's any reason not to do this.
So can I start with the first bullet? And this is something where I am trying to understand if this is a cause or effect, like intended or
If the answer is it's the normal outcome of having a content address store, and we need to go and introduce abnormal means if we don't want that. And therefore it's kind of the implied default. And the discussion we had was kind of, do we really have to produce a new mechanism in registries to do signatures, or can we just use existing mechanisms, which is obviously way simpler?
Yeah, I mean,
and so the question is this enough to build a usable system? This is a hypothesis, not a, so this is a prototype. We can then decide that that wasn't the answer and we need to make these changes, but this is an experiment that I think is quite reasonable.
Well, so again, this is like, it's a question because I don't completely understand parts of it that I might be missing, but if we say that we need to be able to support multiple signatures, and we have this other premise that we want to minimize, I don't want to say we don't at all, because I know the tag mapping to a digest obviously is an updatable piece of data. It's not even actually persisted as a specific spec, but as registries, we all keep this mapping between tag and the digest it represents. So, but that's the only piece of data that I'm aware of that is core to the registry that we do as an updatable element. And that's pretty important for us from a scalability and reliability. It's
so this would not make any changes to that. And so that's the hypothesis, is that we don't need to make any changes. So
how do you do that? How do I have we use the Ubuntu image as an example. Take the Ubuntu signs it, pushes it to a registry. Then I, at my company, say, I want to sign things for dev, staging, and production. So there's, just arguably say there's 3 more signatures I want to add to that artifact as it flows.
Yeah, so that makes a new artifact that consists of 3 signatures and a pointer to the other artifact. And so your object no longer has the same hash as the Ubuntu object because it has additional signatures, but it contains a reference to the Ubuntu object that you can compare for hash equality if you want. And you can check the signatures on the Ubuntu object independently because it's the same Ubuntu object, but the Ubuntu object and your signatures is a new object. And this is...
So if I just understand this, so is the implication here is if I'm trying to figure out what signatures are, like if I know I want the Ubuntu 1404 image and I ask for it, there is in theory, a way we can add something to the register that says, hey, give me all the signatures.
No, we're not. The proposal here is that we don't do that. That was adding an alternative API that can point you at signatures was the other thing we discussed that's substantially more complex and requires substantially more registry changes. And this is a straw man if we don't need to do that.
But I'm not,
Or
that's
what
the part
happens
that
if
I'm
we
not
make the
following.
assumption we don't need to do that? If you, and we
So
have
we're
to,
pushing new updates to the tag 1404 for that with the new digests, and that's how it works?
yeah.
Yes.
And we've got to make this choice. We've got to make a choice of whether we go along with this path that doesn't involve substantial registry changes, if any, or we go to a path that says that signatures are require new API functionality and potentially more substantial registry changes. And
So
the question is this, the question, I mean, my working hypothesis why I want to do an experiment on this is to see, is this usable for in practice for doing the kinds of things we need to do, or is it really too massively inconvenient to not have the kinds of APIs we were also talking about last week, where you can ask for all the signatures that are pointing at an item, for example, or have tags, have some sort of scheme around that reuses tags to provide that kind of functionality. And
I'm just trying to follow the premise here, and before we go writing the code, I think there's a couple of things we could just experiment here. Just if I take the Ubuntu 14.04 image and it's got digest A, we'll keep things super simple, and it came from Ubuntu that way. Let's start. A is signed. It came from Ubuntu. Now I want to sign it, so I push a new index with B. So that's a new index digest it's new, but it points to digest A, so that, and then when staging and prod get added on each one of those machines, the layers don't change. So there's no new caching, no new pulls happening. It mostly becomes an index pull, and it'll ask for the layer IDs and it'll say, oh, I already have those. So it's really just looking at that index that has a signature in it and points to the existing content.
Yeah.
So as long as I'm updating my tag, I basically have to push a new index that is the same tag. And as long as the dev and staging don't try to push that at the same time, that's an interesting problem. Yeah, there's a bit of a concern of a race condition, I guess. But other than, if in a logical flow, in theory, they all point back to the original one. As long as people aren't deploying with digests and they're deploying with the tag.
I mean, I think you use e-tags or whatever to make sure you're not pushing things at the same time. I mean, I think you've always got you've always got a problem with race conditions of pushing.
In theory, I can't think of any time that's actually happened, though. That's why I'm trying to make sure it doesn't continue to happen. I mean, the thing that so basically you're making an explicit call that when I'm trying to deploy something, I'm trying to say, is it a collection of signatures? Like when I push.
Yeah, there can be multiple signatures, yeah.
So the Ubuntu signature, so by the time it became production, the index then has Ubuntu dev staging and production signatures in its index, or does the last index just point at the previous one and I have to walk all of the trees to see the
there's a few comments in that. You might have to walk them. It depends. You can, if you want to keep the original Ubuntu index, you can either point a new index or you can update it to include multiple signatures. To be honest, because signatures effectively sit outside the thing you're signing, so that it doesn't really matter. So yeah, you can either make longer chains, or ideally you compress them. But you might want longer chains if you don't update, if you keep the original object and you just point to it in a chain, you can then refer to all the previous assigned objects with the partial signatures more easily.
So
Because they won't get,
if
the previous ones won't get garbage collected.
Yeah, no,
Unless you want to, unless you tag them, unless you tag all the stages of the process as well, which you can also do.
Yeah, no, it's fair. There is a bit of an assumption of how we're all implementing garbage collections with using these. And I think, as far as I know, we're all fairly consistent. That there's a different style choices of the direction people come in, but I think I'm pretty sure we all do the right garbage collection stuff. What I'm wondering though, is there another approach where we can just push since you're basically just pushing an index? Actually, I'm making an assumption. Does the index actually have another artifact that actually has a content in it? Or is it just like, what's the payload? Are there any other layers? Is kind of what I'm getting at. Or is it
Sorry,
just—
what do you mean?
If I take an image and I sign it, I'm pushing an index is what you're saying. And is there any other content, or is it just an index that says this thing is signed and it's pointing at the digest of the Ubuntu image?
There's two ways of doing it. I mentioned them in the thing, because if you're trying to, that's the simplest way of doing things. You just push an index that points at another index that adds a signature. That's very simple. And
But there's never any layers that represent it. It's just in it.
But you can, in principle, you can sign any manifest. So you could have a manifest. You can have an index with 6 architectures, all of which are individually signed, but the index itself isn't signed. Which,
by the way,
depending on the content that's being pushed, what I was wondering if it could be reverse done. Like, could we actually push the aspect of it signing, and if any content that backs up that signing as an artifact, and it's pointing through its index, pointing back, that we could add, something to a registry that says, give me all the things that reference this digest, which we've all been feeling pressure, and some more than others have done more work. I think Quay has probably done the most work here, where they know more about, like, when I have a digest, we get customers asking all the time, like, what was the history of this tag? Great, the tag now points to this digest, but what did it talk to before so that I could roll it back? So keeping track of that is an indexing problem. And being able to say, here's the Ubuntu images, the Ubuntu image, this particular one, what are the things that point to it, so that I can find out what all the signatures are, what are the content verifications for this thing. Or it might just be, hey, I'm trying to free up some space. This takes up 2 gigs in my registry. What do if I delete just this one thing, I'm not going to free up any space. My point of the latter is—
yeah, so that would be, that's the alternative route from this. And I think if we could also prototype that, but I think that's more, that requires APIs that a registry is not required to have, and not all registries have.
That's fair. But we said
it's possible. So, but there might be people who don't want to implement those APIs.
Then they don't support Notary V2.
so
We can make that decision. Yeah, I think it's. But if my hypothesis is that if this is good enough, then we can implement it easily, and it has the limitation which we could decide to work around later, potentially. But we don't have to require everyone to implement these extra APIs now to do Notary V2.
I was going to say that this isn't too much different than Schema 1 in terms of how it works from the registry's perspective. And maybe talking to Quay is a good idea, because Quay actually seemed to really like Schema 1 and resisted a lot moving on to Schema 2.
What was the difference with Schema 1 that's relevant for this exactly? Can you just, for people who are not
Schema
sure?
1 had the signature built into the manifest. it wasn't great in terms of the way the signature was processed. It was basically had a JW.
Yeah,
the JWT, and then it would recreate the original content and use that. So like the problem is always like when you're embedding this, like how do you actually recreate the JSON that you're signing? So like there was bugs there where you could, if you didn't process the JSON in the right order, you could basically get it to overwrite the part of the content that was actually being signed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, those bits need to be.
Well, just any time you're like using content before you verify it, there's always like more surface area for those type of bugs to creep in the implementations. I mean, generally, like we use that solution for a reason, and that it was because everything was signed, and we moved to Schema 2. I mean, that was one thing that a lot of us weren't too happy about when we moved to Schema 2 is in Schema 1, there was always a signature. The problem is like we didn't have a good way to like map that signature to the keys. But like in Schema 2, we got rid of it as part of Notary V1 essentially. And Schema 2 is much better. So like adding signatures back, I don't necessarily think I don't think it's a bad idea. I mean, I think there's a lot of good reasons to have it there. And I know the registry doesn't really have too much of a problem with it, but I'm just saying that we had a couple of years of essentially prototyping a solution like this, like how tags change when signatures change, and how content hashes work in this type of world. So we can look back a little bit on that, but yeah, I mean the problem was always just getting back to how do we know the keys are actually valid in this case, or
So oh, go ahead, Justin.
No, I was just agreeing. I mean, the problem with V1 was that key management was not really thought out.
Well, actually, I was just going to say the original design for key management in V1 was to use Tough, and then eventually that evolved into doing Notary instead.
Yeah, I was going to say this is just to raise a meta point, which is that. So I think this is an important conversation to have, right? Part of the deal breaker requirement in Notary V2 is that we got to keep the signatures, the metadata, whatever we call it, in the same place as the registry. Like that's non-negotiable. I totally get it. And I think that how we do this in the most elegant way going forward, whether or not we need to add new APIs, is a very important discussion, right? This is the problem we're going to need to solve eventually. But I think what's missing, as both Derek and Justin were alluding to earlier, is that we're missing meta questions about key management. Okay, so let's assume that we've solved this problem, right? Assume that we have this nice, elegant way that doesn't break backwards compatibility. We know where to stick in signatures. Great. Now the question is, what do we sign? What types of metadata? Who signs what? How do we handle threshold signatures? These are the kind of questions that I think we should also discuss as part of this ongoing subject. I don't know, does anyone have thoughts about this?
I want to agree with that in general. And also I want to agree that I want to mention, so first of all, sorry for joining late. I didn't see that we had like a last minute meeting schedule thing until fortunately I happened to see a message on Slack. But I also think, we need to be very careful looking at what are we trying to achieve and what security properties are we trying to get. And we're really still missing a bit of information that needs to be there for this. And so with a little bit of work in that area, I think it's really possible for us to answer a lot of the important questions, like the ones that Trishank is asking, or the ones that have been discussed in this meeting, at least for the short while that I've been in it before that. But I feel like it's, we're sort of starting with a bunch of stuff around that isn't and trying to like make design decisions and things without really thinking about what we're trying to achieve with the security mechanisms that we're talking about adding.
I'm not sure what gap it is that you're referring to that we haven't captured. I mean, there's a style that we've talked about that if once I get the artifact stuff spec wrapped up, I'll come back and work on the other doc we've been reviewing. But I think what I'm hearing here more is this balance between what is the implication to existing registries and the changes that we want to make. What do we need to do early in a prototype to validate some of the other persistence that we've been discussing? I'm not sure I'm hearing that we're excluding something per se. There's definitely an assumption we have to do better about key management. That's a clear one. We have captured that.
But without like the threat model, or without really understanding the threat model and like really what we're trying to achieve in the scenarios, it's hard to know if we're hitting the target. It's like the goal isn't to just put signatures here or there to do things. It's to have those actually protect you from an attacker who wants to achieve certain things. Mm-hmm. And so, like Trishank saying, hey, we need to support threshold signing. I am 99.9% sure that Trishank's statement is correct. We probably do have to have some support for this, but threshold signing isn't actually a feature that we, can say for sure in many ways that we need, because the purpose of it is to protect in situations where you've had, bad things happen, and you need, if you'd had a threshold of people going and doing an operation, this would have been much less likely. And so I feel like we've all kind of skipped ahead a few steps in the process here, and we're already like starting to put things together without bothering to think about what we're building towards in some cases, or at least we need to finish that part of the process, it feels like.
Well, we talked on the earlier call. We are trying to make some incubations to try to learn more. There's some gaps in what we don't know, and so far we've been, yes, COVID and blah, 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 but we've been talking about this since December, and we need to actually start getting some code in place to learn some of the gaps that we don't know. Some of the things that there's some pieces around registry implications that we need to understand if we need to make new APIs. There's some understanding around key management. There's some people that want to be able to start delving in and are already delving in, but they're delving into a space we're not investing in. So that's not helpful. We've tried to, I think, the piece that I've been pushing on is the multiple signatures is one that we have captured. We need to make sure we can support that. How is why I was asking the questions. If there's gaps in the threat model that we were talking about, that we did have a threat model working group that you and some others that were on. I'm hoping we can get those written down in a way that we can, go back and read those and like, all right, how does that address, threat model 3? So those are the things we're trying to get written up.
The point, like we have, sorry, go ahead.
So I think there's just a gap in the language. I think what we need to do is, and this is just my opinion, here's what I think we need to do. We need to have a solid threat model meeting where we all sit down and we say, look, what are the security problems we're trying to solve, right? So for example, are we worried about people just having one signing key that signs for everything? So then you might say, okay, so that's the problem. And the solution is, one solution is threshold signatures, right? The other solution is offline keys for some of them. This is the kind of discussion we need to have, I think. And I don't think we've had that yet. I think it'd be very useful if we have like a brainstorm whiteboard kind of session where we draw pictures and we say, look, what are we worried about? What do we think our attackers can do? Who's keeping keys where, right? This sort of discussion, because yeah, I think this is what Justin is trying to drive at too.
Well, I think there's two different conversations going on here. So like the first is just signatures, just getting the signatures that can be attached to content and just having some way to verify that. and then actually doing the key management, which to me sounds like it's more of the hard work, because that's everything that Tough is helping us with today. And without that, you know, I was basically saying, yeah, we had the same thing as Schema 1, and Schema 1 was worthless basically without something like Tough. But I guess the question is, do we want to, like with Notary V1, we squeeze the two together, and I think we see that wasn't really a usable solution either, so we want to separate the two. But what I really want to know is, first off, are we okay with just the way of storing signatures in the registry? And I think attaching them to an index or having dedicated APIs, both are good solutions. They both kind of solve the same problem, which is just linking signatures with content. But then also, are we discussing doing key management, Tough like key management in the registry, in which case, you know, we're talking about kind of a separate set of APIs here to do this.
Yeah, it's not clear. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, the key management is an interesting one. I think we had a working group that was split on this. It would be good if we can revive some of this. Unfortunately, a lot of the same people are in both these working groups, and everybody's got their day jobs. So we're trying to figure out how to make good progress here. Now we have Brian from, and Sam, remind me, how do I pronounce his name again? You're Brian?
I'm not sure who. I don't know who Brian is on your side, so I don't know how to.
Sorry,
who you're talking about on my side.
Quickly trying to go back to. All right. Anyway, you're expert. Niaz. And I don't know if Niaz and Brian are exactly comparable, but they're certainly in depths of areas that seem very similar, and why I want them both involved. The point is that we need to get more people involved. We need to make more progress on it. We're trying to get things written down so that we can review it. I mean, I keep on asking Justin to let me know what he's thinking. He keeps on saying, I will, but let me write it down. And it's the best way for this thing to scale. We keep on referring back to Sam's doc that he wrote up a while ago on the design options. So that's been really helpful to write those down. So I guess I would really encourage, Trishank and Cappos here to help us with this threat model doc that we've talked about, that we didn't want to put in that we captured the scenarios into the scenarios doc, but we agreed there was another section of those that should go in, not a threat model of code, but a threat model of the kind of things that you're referring to. Because honestly, you're bringing up stuff that I just want it to work. I don't know. I'm trusting others will help us figure it out. But there's a detail there, an expertise that we're asking you guys to help bring, and bring some clarity, write it up in a way that the others of us that don't understand it can digest.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interest in doing that from our side. Like, we'd like to be able to do this. I think that part of the problem is that there's a lot of things that are like baked into what's in the scenarios that's hard for us to go through and do this. So we're really looking forward to getting that, like the information that is really at the level that we can do the threat model work and things like that with. And also any description about things that are absolutely hard requirements basically in the system. I am, as I said, I came into this late. I'm looking at the signatures and standard OCI documents. If you have this other level of indirection with this manifest list, et cetera, is this something that I don't really get exactly what's going on here, but it feels like that could be something like a targets file inside of something like Tough, where it can be something that has a secure hash of something and points to it. Is that a fair reading of it? And if so, I have a fair amount of other questions about related things with the document.
It's something that you could, in principle, the idea with this, I think I mentioned probably before you came, was that what I wanted to do with this is build something that makes sense in a registry that you can, as a example, build out what the Tough metadata would look like on top of this, so that we have a registry native way of storing Tough metadata that makes sense both from a registry point of view and from a tough point of view.
Okay, so is there a reason why I don't really understand why adding or changing a signature will modify content? I assume content here you mean actually like a image, not like a targets file or something.
The content address of what the tag points to, essentially.
Right. So the actual thing you would want to install is changed when you add a signature, as I understand it. And if that's true, I don't understand why. Why we would, because you sort of have two options, right? You either have a thing that you sign, and your sign is embedded in the thing you're signing, which is something like is common, for instance, for packages in most Linux distros. That's very common. Or you have things where the signature is detached from the thing you're signing. And that's common when you have scenarios where you have multiple people, possibly disjoint sets of people that want to refer to the same thing, or and they want to sign and do things with it. Because if you have the signature embedded and then you have multiple people trying to do it, then of course it changes the thing as you're going. So why, I don't really understand why this first point, why we want to have a signature embedded in the thing. Why not just have signatures in things that are, in metadata that has a secure hash of the thing we're referring to?
Justin, it might be worth reviewing a little bit of the OCI image spec that describes the relationship between the different components that we're talking about. So the image spec has the definition for an index, a manifest, and the things that make up a manifest, and that's the components for an OCI image. These are all the things that get stored in a registry. And so what Justin Cormack's doc is focused on, and what the doc that I wrote a while ago is focused on, is are we able to reuse the same concepts that are defined in that image spec to describe how the signatures can be related to the objects that are stored in the registry. So the things like how a signature relates to a manifest, how a signature could potentially relate to layers, things like that. So that's where these terms come from and where the content addressability parts are defined. And that's the existing ecosystem that we're working in today.
Yeah, the actual identifiers that's used for the image, I mean, that depends, like, there's a hash tree. It just depends where on this hash tree you want to call it an identifier. For example, internally, the runtimes tend to use the config digest, which is much lower down in the hash tree, because that actually represents the file system apart from potential changes and like compression and stuff like that. So like you can go up the tree more, and then you're just changing that hash of, say, the index, which would change the tag. But as was mentioned earlier, for example, if you're doing stuff like e-tags to see if something has changed, there's a new signature. So from a runtime perspective, pulling down a changed or a new version of that manifest is probably what's wanted, because you want to verify that new signature, even though after that no content may have changed. So it would just be a no op after that.
So Justin, so effectively we're saying that the embedded signatures is more natural for a registry than detached signatures. That was the other conversation we had before, where if we want to have detached signatures, we have to make a whole new set of APIs for handling detached signatures in registries. But I don't fundamentally think it affects, it shouldn't make any real difference to, for example, implementing tough in the registry, whether or not we do one or the other. No, other than the fact that our document formats are going to be a little different from the tough spec document formats, but they're going to be equivalent.
It may make things, there are a few things here that are possibly, I don't know that problematic is the right word. Maybe problematic is the right word. So one of the things that Tough protects against. Sorry. So let me ask a clarifying question first before I point out what I think is a problem, which is that, are you also envisioning that there is additionally a piece of targets metadata, or are you envisioning a scenario where, let's say that a user, Bob, wants to go and have 3 different targets files that they would have otherwise, listed as valid in their targets file. So does Bob now go and individually sign those 3? Sorry, I'm not sure I'm going to have the right term here, but is it the image manifest that he signs for these, or the image indexes, or whatever he's saying for these? Does he individually sign those and then upload them in the new proposal, or does he still create a single targets file that has?
You still create a single targets file that will be pointed at by the signed manifest. But that's one of the reasons why I actually want to prototype this out, to show that it does, that you can implement Tough on top of this without modifying any of the properties.
Okay, so in the end, what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with a targets file that refers to the things that you care about. And that targets file is a single file that has a single version that was signed by Bob.
Yeah.
And has other metadata that points to it, and everything pointed to or indirectly pointed to is all still has secure hashes.
Yeah.
Okay. If that's true, then I think it's probably going to be fine.
And I think that's why it's worth prototyping. Effectively, if we add minimal mechanisms, we can make something that we can say that we can construct Tough from. Therefore, that's a kind of demonstration of what the requirements to do that are, and make sure that it still makes sense from that point of view.
What does the targets file represent here in your proposal, Justin?
Targets is just it's just artifacts, OCI artifacts. Could be images, could be bundles, anything. You don't really care, but that's what we mean by targets in Tough.
But is it a collection of all the or like all the manifests, or what?
It's all of them that a specific individual is attesting are correct, or a role are attesting are correct. And
yeah, but I'm not sure what. Sorry, go ahead.
I was also saying you can also do things like I can say, well, Trishank is the one who knows what the Datadog images are supposed to be. Therefore, what if you're asking me what's correct, then if it's Datadog, you should really ask Trishank and trust him. She can do delegations and all sorts of other things.
I think what Derek is asking is the actual specifics. What exactly is it signing a manifest or an index? Again, I'm not familiar with these terms either, so I think that's what he means.
Yeah, I mean, I generally know how it's used in kind of Notary V1 in terms of like the targets file is what's mapping the actual digest and tags, right? So how would that change in this case? Unless I got that wrong.
It wouldn't necessarily change. You still end up with doing the same thing.
So guys, I'm sorry to jump in here late. Steve invited me to come in just to get some clarification about what you guys are discussing. So there's this idea that we would have the signatures contained in a parallel artifact to the manifest itself and then placed in an index, correct? At least that was as far as my understanding coming in before, right?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, so my understanding, and forgive me, I haven't been in here for a couple of weeks because of other unrelated stuff that's been going on our team, but my understanding is that the plan was to have the signatures be contained as a parallel artifact within an index. So you'd have an index pointed to by a tag, and then you'd have the signatures and then the manifest. Was that still what we're discussing, or has that design moved on since then?
That sounds right. Sorry, were you late to this meeting?
I couldn't come to this meeting earlier because of
Yeah, sorry. So I wrote a doc that maybe you can't see the chat history again because it's anyway. That's that doc, which is a proposal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which
so
basically, yeah. I think what you're saying is what this says.
It looks like it is. So the one thing I wanted to mention, and this is just something, I don't know if anyone here has been tracking the discussion that's been going on around diffs, like adding diffs into the OCI image/containers. If not, I'll send around a link. But basically, there's a team at Red Hat that's interested in adding support for layer diffs, and they were planning on doing so like adjacent to a manifest. And I responded and proposed, well, why not just create a new index that points to both the unmodified manifest as well as your special diffing artifact type. And they had a number of reasons they didn't want to do that. And so their current plan is to basically have a naming convention where if you have a tag foo, they're going to have like deltas dash foo. And I'm not very excited about this idea. But it occurs to me that there seems to be a similar open question here, which is ideally, right, we wouldn't need to modify the thing that the tag is pointing to in order to sign it, right? Because really the manifest itself is what's we're pulling. The signatures are somewhat out of band metadata associated with that manifest, right?
Yeah, so we did discuss the possibility of having special tags pointing at the signatures at the last meeting. So, and so, yeah, that's definitely another option.
So I'm not a huge fan of that either.
I'm not. I mean, there's various points at which it's come up that actually the objects that are the old signed object and the differently signed object are still actually valid objects that you might want to refer to for reasons.
Right.
And so I kind of think that the signatures changing this, adding a new signature and modifying the thing is potentially a feature, not a bug. But this was I think that's why I kind of wanted to prototype it though, so that, well, I mean, Derek pointed out we did prototype it 5 years ago, but 6 years ago, but to see if it's usable, because I think that if it is acceptable, then it's much simpler than doing something else. And I tend to agree with you that that having special tags for diffs is kind of horrible.
Yeah. So one of the things I've been giving some thought to the last couple of days after hearing about this diff thing and now thinking about it from the signature thing. And by the way, what I'm about to say is not a proposal. I could be wildly off. I am simply going to toss an idea into the air and then everyone can rip it to shreds and that'll be good. And that way it'll get out of my mind. But one of the things I've been thinking about is there's definitely scenarios where like an index is referring not to different information, or I'm sorry, not to different versions of something, but rather to metadata about a particular manifest, right? Like, so for an image, metadata could consist of diffs, signatures, maybe even, variants of that particular manifest. And I'm wondering, and again, this could be wildly a terrible idea, is I'm wondering if, and I know people are probably going to say no to the idea of adding new APIs, but I'm wondering if there may be some need for us to provide something along the lines of like a linked tag or a linked manifest or something where we say this manifest here is metadata assigned on top of this other manifest or something. And then you can request when you pull the main tag, you could say, and I want the variant information here thereof, right? So you'd say pull latest tag, but I want the signatures for latest tag as opposed to the image. Now, I mean, this could be implemented again using an OCI index and just having the registry pick the correct sub-manifest. But I'm wondering if that would solve some of this problem. Again, this may be a terrible idea, but I'm just thinking out loud.
Well, that's been the piece that I've been trying to poke at, is like there's always this cause and effect, like what is the intent versus the result. And the thing is, much as we try to promote, there's a best practice, we believe, that tags are the way you do things, and you do unique tagging, and then there's features you add for unique tagging and blah, 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 that people do use deployments with digests. And the idea that we have to change the reference to the digest just to be able to get a signature is the part that I struggle with. If we can say, and granted, this is a new API, but we already have new APIs just to support Notary. So registries that don't currently support signing in this Notary, or the ones that do, we're going to change anyway. It's not a bad thing to add some APIs. If I can keep the digest of the thing that originally came from Ubuntu, and that doesn't ever change, but I could add signatures to that, and then I could at any time use this granted new API to say, what are the signatures? What are the things? And the signatures could have content. I'm not trying to exclude any of the tough conversations. What are the things that reference this? But I still can always reference it by its digest and original tag. And if that means I can now get, regardless of how we store it, right? The registry's got a really powerful way of storing these things. That we have the ability to digest the thing from Ubuntu didn't ever change. The tags are a different thing, but I could always refer to it, but I could always get this extra information that happens to be signatures and some kind of verification of that.
But then you need a set of APIs for managing the extra information. That's kind of what we discussed before. You need to be able to list the extra information, put and get it. It needs to have APIs. That's what we talked about with the extension API. And it's just,
well, right, but you could do it, right, as something where it's basically if you push an OCI index that contains the extra information so like if the signatures are in the index and the manifest is in the index, right? Now you've created a relationship between those two items via an index. So you could, in theory, just add one API that says, like, given a manifest digest, list me all of the other artifacts of this content type that exist with that manifest in some index somewhere, perhaps optionally for a tag or not. Again, I'm just wildly spitballing here. So that could, in theory, allow you to say, basically, give me all the signatures that have been linked to this particular manifest, while still ensuring that if you're going to sign something, you're pushing it as a updated index from a tag. Maybe that's an approach. I'm not sure.
No, but I think there's something to riff on there, because I think that if we, with places that get me nervous about things we change into the registry are like the storage infrastructure that we've all had to implement and spend years making robust. Creating, and some of registries like Quay have gone much further on doing really rich indexing, while others have been reluctant to do databasey things because, various reasons. We're getting dragged into it. We are adding it. But adding an API that can do some better indexing over content that we could already store with the rich information that's already there, that feels a minimalistic thing that we could do and really provide a lot of value. Maybe it's part of this exercise we should figure out what are the areas we do not want to touch, because it's hugely impactful, it's scary, it's gnarly, whatever. And what are the places that, hey, it's easy for us to touch and it's no big deal to add feature X, especially now that we have this extension model thing that I keep on referring to as if Vincent's done with it already. But
yeah. I mean, I think part of the discussion last time was that actually there's all sorts of things about how do we fit the access control into it and things like that. That's complicated. Okay. I don't think that I don't think in the long run these things are necessarily exclusive, but I think that I wouldn't build a new, I'm not sure if building a mechanism like this just for signing would be, I think if there's many other use cases for I don't know on any of this. I don't know. I mean, I'm somewhat wary of requiring, very substantial registry changes in order to add signing.
So guys, unfortunately, I need to go. It's 3 p.m. for me
Yes, so
here.
do I.
But I think we really need to arrange another meeting where we discuss high-level meta questions like this before we go further. Because otherwise, I'm afraid that we will accidentally spin around in circles. How should we arrange this meeting? What do you think, Steve?
Well, we've been, iterating here. I think the piece that we've been discussing is there's a bunch of things that we're obviously trying to solve from a core registry implementation. And that, that's why I sucked in Joey, because he's probably done some of the more advanced stuff and long, deep thinking of how to index and do stuffs in registries. There's this persistence model. There's how do we learn from the stuff that we did in V1 and went to V2, and maybe there's some stuff in V1 that was still good. There's another aspect that you guys are bringing, you and Cappos, and I hope you guys don't mind me using your last name as reference because so many Justins now, or at least two, there's a set of details of threat modeling and security that you guys are making sure that we think of, and I want to make sure we include that. But I think there's a gap in understanding how the problems we're wrestling around from the registry. So I think it was Sam, somebody put in a link to some of the specs. They're not that big. They're if you can take a look at those, I think that'll help understand some of the problems we're wrestling with. That we can, kind of keep these conversations going, because there's a center of these conversations I think we still need to solve. It's each team bring in their expertise in, and how do we have enough information about that can make the conversations more efficient and collaborative. And if you could help, so there's probably two things. One is read up on those, they're not that big. And if you could help scribble down some of the threat model things that you were doing, some of which I captured in the scenarios that Justin gave me earlier. There was some that we said should be in this other doc. If you can help us with that expertise, I think we'll be able to have the basis to continue moving forward.
Yeah, we will. I think that's a great idea. I think Justin, Marina, and I should take a look at these documents that Cormac and others have produced, Samuel, and think about it from a threat model point of view and add to it, right? And run it by you guys and see whether we're all speaking the same language. What do you guys think, Cappos and Marina?
Yeah, I would be happy to look over those and help out.
Same here.
Great. Thanks, folks. We're already past. I know people have to go. Let me figure out the challenge we're trying to do is figure out how to do time zone management with, East Coast is not as hard, but compared to Justin, and he's got a lot of US time meetings he's trying to meet at the same time. So we have a narrow window sometimes. Let me figure out the next time. Do we want to, Justin, Cormac, can you do for next meeting? Hopefully we can do something.
Can you ask, I've got to go now, but can you just
we'll do it on
Slack?
Slack.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. All
right. Thanks, folks.
Thanks.
And Derek, I saw your
Thank
feedback.
you.
I'll take a look at it now. Later, folks.
See you.